Welcome, dear heart, to another episode of Courage, Dear Heart. If you're new here, my name is Charli Wall, and my work is about guiding women into deep remembrance of who they are. I hold spaces where women can come home to themselves, whether that's through one-to-one coaching, group journeys, programs, retreats, my Wild Awakening retreats, or the Call to Descent, my new program, where we explore self-reclamation and feminine wisdom. I don't believe this work is about becoming something new. It is about remembering. It is about coming back to the parts of ourselves we have forgotten or buried. And today I want to talk about something that so many of us experience, but that we just don't often have the language for, and that is descent. What happens when life is not lifting you up, but pulling you in deeper? When everything that once felt steady starts to unravel? When you find yourself in a season of loss, grief, uncertainty, or deep transformation? Descent is not something we often talk about because we live in a world that worships the rise, the ascension. We are praised when we are ascending, expanding, achieving, and creating. But what about the seasons when life calls us to go inward, to slow down, to sit with what is raw and unresolved? So today we're going to explore what it means to navigate the descent, what it is, why it happens, and what it's asking of you. Why we resist these seasons and how softening into them actually makes them easier to move through. How grief, heartbreak, and uncertainty are invitations into a deeper relationship with yourself. Lessons from ancient feminine myths like Inanna, Persephone, and the Selkie, and how they guide us through our own descent. And finally, how descent expands our capacity to hold life, love, and abundance in ways that we have never imagined. I'll be sharing some of my own story about how loss, grief, and submission have shaped me. But here's the truth. Descent is a part of the feminine path. And if you are in it right now, if you are feeling the weight of the unknown, I want you to know that you are not alone. The descent is the feminine path, the way of going deeper, not higher, going down and in to the body. We are told that progress means rising, growing, reaching higher, moving forward. And yet so much of the feminine experience is about depth, submission, and cycles of renewal. The masculine path is often linear. It's about building, expanding, and ascending. The feminine path is cyclical. It's about spiraling inward, shedding, dissolving, remembering. And so descent is not about failure, but it is about being called back to yourself in a way that you can no longer ignore. So how does descent show up in our lives? The descent is what happens when life pulls us inward instead of forward. It is the winter season of our lives, the moment when the leaves fall, when the external world goes quiet, when everything we thought we could rely on disappears. It is the waning moon, the darkness before the dawn, the moment of exhalation when we must finally stop trying to hold everything together. It is when life as we knew it begins to unravel. And descent does not always come in ways we expect. It usually comes suddenly through loss, or heartbreak, or a dramatic shift that forces us into the unknown. Or it can arrive slowly, a creeping exhaustion, a subtle unraveling, the moment we realize that we are no longer aligned with who we think we are and with who we are becoming. Sometimes descent is a longing we cannot explain, a deep ache in the bones, a knowing, a feminine gnosis that something has been missing, but we can't yet name what that is. Sometimes it feels like nothing is wrong externally, but something inside us feels restless, dissatisfied, and incomplete. And that latter one is something I hear over and over and over again. There is nothing wrong with my life, so why do I feel so restless, so unhappy? Other times, descent can feel like the rug has been pulled out from under us. For example, the job we identified with disappears. The relationship we thought would last ends. Someone betrays us. Or an illness forces us to stop and face what we've been avoiding. Or maybe we simply reach a point where we can no longer ignore the quiet whispers calling us to change. Why do we resist the descent? We resist the descent because it can feel like we're losing control. We want to cling to certainty, to what is known, what is familiar, even if it no longer nourishes us. And we try to push forward when life is asking us to slow down. We try to make sense of it, rationalize it, intellectualize it. But descent is an embodied experience and not a logical one. So here's what I've learned in my own experience through my lifetime of many descents. It is not the enemy. It is not a punishment. It is an invitation. Descent is not about destruction. It is about the return, the remembering. A return to truth, your truth, a return to wholeness. Healing just means to make whole. So it's integrating all of those parts of yourself back in to yourself. A return to those parts of yourself that you may have abandoned to fit into a life that was never truly yours. So the natural world understands descent, obviously. Nature, the earth does not fear the fall of the autumn leaves. The moon does not resist the darkness of its waning phase. And the ocean does not reject its tides as they pull back into the depths. And yet, as women, we are taught to fear our own cycles. We're taught to resist slowing down. We're taught to avoid the discomfort of grief, rage, emptiness. Don't be too loud. Don't have too big emotions. And we're taught to see stillness and introspection as weakness rather than wisdom. But ancient feminine mysteries teach us otherwise. In my experience, the descent is where the deepest alchemy occurs. It is the womb space of transformation where the old dissolves so that something new can be born. It is the void, the threshold, the edge, the feminine edge, the liminal space where we come face to face with our deepest truths. And it is the death before the rebirth. Because before we can rise, we must be willing to go down, but not stay down. Not wallow down in the swamp, but go down and face the parts of us and let some of those parts of us die because they're not serving you. They're old protector parts that were established when you were very young, part of your nervous system. And they're there for good reason, but there's a reason why you're feeling potentially unsettled. So I just wanted to ask you, if descent isn't failure, what is it? What if the moments when you feel like you're losing yourself are actually the moments when you are meeting yourself most deeply? But if you can do that without disconnecting, if you can meet yourself without numbing out on the phone or spending money or drinking or eating or gambling, or sexing. Not that there's anything wrong with any of those things. Please do hear that. It's just that when we're afraid to meet ourselves and be with ourselves, we distract. So I wanted to just take a moment to speak about myth and why it's so important for women. For centuries, women have been taught that myth is just storytelling, that it's fiction, a thing of the past, something disconnected from the real struggles of life. But myth to me is not just a story. It is become to me a map, a guide, a mirror that reflects back to us the mythopoetic archetypal journeys that we are destined to walk. Long before we had psychology and self-development books or healing frameworks, we had myth. And in myth, we find ourselves. We find our grief. We find our heartbreak. We find our loss. We find resonance. We find our rage, our longing, our exile, and our return home to self. And there are three myths that I love that speak so clearly to the descent, a path that every woman will walk in her lifetime. The descent of Inanna, the great Sumerian goddess, who chooses to enter the underworld and is stripped of everything she thought defined her. The story of Persephone, who is taken into the depth, forced into darkness, yet emerges not as a victim, but as a queen of both light and shadow. And the tale of the Selkie, the woman of the sea who loses her skin, is forced to live in exile and must find the courage to reclaim what was always hers. Each of these stories holds a key to our own healing. So let's begin with Inanna, one of the oldest recorded descent myths in history. She offers something unique. She chooses the descent. Inanna is a goddess of fertility, love, and power. She is revered, radiant, and full of life, but she hears a call to go down into the underworld, to face something deeper, something unknown, and so she descends. But before she can enter, she must pass through 7 gates, and at each gate, she is forced to give something up. Her crown, her robes, her jewels, her weapons, every symbol of her power in the topside world, until she stands naked, stripped of everything that she thought she was. And it's in this place that she is undone. For so many of us, this is exactly what descent feels like. The loss of a relationship that forces us to question who we are without it. The grief that strips us of the life that we thought we would have. The burnout, the exhaustion, the moment we realize that everything we built was built on a version of us that can no longer hold it. So the descent, it strips us, but it is only in the stripping that we find what was real all along. And Inanna's story doesn't end there. She doesn't stay in the underworld. She is reborn. She returns, but she does so differently. She has met her shadow. She has faced her own undoing. And now she is not just a goddess of love and light. She has walked through death and returned as something more, and so have we. Every time we surrender to a descent, every time we let go of the illusions of who we thought we were, we return with a new kind of wisdom. Because descent isn't just about loss, it's about the rebirth that follows. And then we have Persephone. Unlike Inanna, Persephone doesn't choose the descent. She is taken, stolen from the topside world, dragged into the underworld by Hades. She is forced into a world she never asked for. And I'm sure that this is how so many of our descents feel. The sudden death, the betrayal we didn't see coming, the illness, the divorce, the moment everything falls apart and we didn't get a say in it, because we don't always get to choose descent. Sometimes life chooses it for us. And yet what happens to Persephone is not the end of her story. At first she resists, she grieves, she longs for the life she had before. But in time something shifts. She begins to see the underworld differently. She eats the pomegranate seeds, a choice that binds her to both realms. And so she becomes queen, not just of light, not just of darkness, but she learns to walk between the worlds. And that's what descent teaches us, that we are not just our grief and we are not just our past. We can learn how to hold both, the ache and the aliveness, the longing and the knowing, the pain and the beauty. Persephone is a woman who is taken into darkness, and yet she emerges not as a prisoner, but as a sovereign force who understands the depths of life in a way no one else does. And so do we. And then finally we have the Selkie, a woman of the sea, a creature of wildness, of belonging to the deep. And yet her skin is stolen. She is forced onto land. She forgets who she was. She forgets the feeling of water against her body, the way her soul was once free. And I think about all of the ways that women experience this, the slow separation from their own bodies, their sensuality, their instinct, their natural magnetism, the ways we are taught to be good, quiet, acceptable, and how we trade our wildness for belonging. The way we forget who we were before the world told us who we should be. But the Selkie story is not just about exile, it is about the return. Because one day the Selkie finds her skin again, and she does not hesitate, she does not ask for permission. She takes it, she reclaims it, and she goes back to the water where she always belonged. And this is what descent offers us, the chance to return to ourselves, to see where we lost parts of ourselves along the way, to remember that our wild, untamed, knowing self has never been lost. It's only waiting for us to come back. And so I invite you to consider, what parts of you have you forgotten? What have you given away that was never meant to be taken? And are you ready to reclaim it? So in my own life, I have experienced the descent in all of those ways. I have experienced the descent where I chose to descend, like Inanna did. After my father died, I chose to go into the underworld, for want of a better word. I sold everything. I literally made that choice to do that. When my brother was killed in 1993, like Persephone, I didn't have a choice. That choice was taken from me by life. And it was an incredibly difficult experience in my life, in my body, in my experience at that young age. But it was a descent nonetheless. And now, even though I wouldn't wish that upon anyone, I'm extraordinarily grateful for that experience. And like the Selkie, I've had my skin stolen from me in various ways. I'm sure that we all have had that experience. But over these last few years, I have gone on a journey of reclamation. I have had to sit with my pain, with my grief, with my shadow, with all of the ways that I've disconnected from myself. I've taken responsibility for all of these parts of my life, and I've brought them all in with love and kindness and respect and reverence, because shame is erosive, blame and criticism and the shitty committee just was not helping me at all. In fact, it was keeping me stuck. And this is why I'm so passionate about sharing about the descent and teaching about the descent and bringing women together so that they can share their stories. That is why I run my retreats, my Wild Awakening retreats, because once a woman shares her story, she realizes that she is not alone. So I'd love to ask you if there's a grief you've been holding on to but haven't allowed yourself to fully feel. Have you been running from it, hiding from it? Is there a longing that has been rising within you but you've been too afraid to face it? Is there a truth that you know in your bones that you've been avoiding? Something that wants to be acknowledged so it can heal? Or is there a quiet knowing deep within you, a feminine gnosis that is calling you to trust the path ahead even though you cannot see the way? You don't have to have all the answers for now, and it's not about fixing anything. It's not about solving or escaping. It's just about witnessing what is, being with what lives within you, because that is part of the descent. It's a stripping away of the old skins, the illusions, the cages, the defenses we've built. And yes, it can be uncomfortable, it can be raw, and it can feel vulnerable. But it's in that vulnerability that we become feelable and we come home. We come back to ourselves because we're in full permission of all of the parts we've buried, to the parts we've forgotten. And those parts then are ready to emerge with a new wisdom, a new truth, and a deep sense of power. So I just want to invite you into something deeper if you feel called. If anything that I've said during this podcast episode has resonated with you or stirred something within you, if you are feeling the call to descend, if you know that you're on the edge of something, but you are unsure of how to move through it, then I have created this 7-day program called The Call to Descent, which is a space for women who are feeling this exact pull. So we will explore during the 7-day guided initiation, what is the descent and why do we resist it? The fears and blocks and edges that keep us clinging to the surface, meeting the hidden places within you that are ready to be seen, the role of grief, rage and stillness in feminine reclamation, and the process of trusting the unknown, sitting in the fertile void and allowing the descent to unfold. It is the prelude program to Sacred Descent, which is a 10-day program going even deeper into these aspects of the feminine. But it's not something that I want you to force. It's something that we open to. And so for those of you who are already deep in it, who know that you are being asked to walk through a profound unraveling, to submit into a full initiation into the depths of yourself, I invite you into the call to descent. This is for the woman who is ready to meet herself in a way she never has before. So with all of that, the descent is always available to you whenever you need it. You are not alone in this journey. You are held and you are supported. I have a free Facebook community called Wild Awakening, Understanding Your Feminine Nature, where there's now 1,500 women in there, and they're all in their own way on the journey of unfolding and emerging. So you'd be very welcome to join us in that. In the meantime, I'd love to have you in the call to descent, but have courage, dear heart, and remember the descent is a coming home to yourself. Thank you for listening to Courage, Dear Heart. I really appreciate it. It would be amazing if you could leave me a review and press subscribe so that others who are looking to find freedom from anxiety and habits can find their way here. You can also go to my website, iamcharliewall.com, and subscribe, sign up for my emails, and you'll also find my Facebook group, Finding Freedom from Habits and Anxiety, on Facebook. So yeah, please do connect with me, and I'll see you next week.